please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today.
Good morning, Senator, and good morning, committee members. My name is Matt Rouse. I'm Senior Vice President, Global Sales for Qatar Airways, a role based in Doha, Qatar.
Good morning, Senator. Good morning, Chairman, and thank you for this invitation. My name is Fatih Ati. I'm the Senior Vice President for Aeropolitical and Corporate Affairs.
Thank you. I now invite you to make a short opening statement and then we will proceed to questions.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you for this opportunity to appear before the committee. At Qatar Airways, we were surprised and shocked by the decision of the Australian government to reject our application for additional flights to Australia. Even more surprising was that the government gave us no reason for rejecting our application. We really can't understand why. Qatar Airways and the State of Qatar have been a friend and ally of Australia for 40 years. We've demonstrated that commitment during good times and particularly during tough times. We currently generate $3 billion of economic benefits to Australia. We create well-paying Australian jobs, support Australian travel agents, support Australian tourism and support exporters. And we were there when Australians faced tough times. When other airlines turned their back on Australia, Australians turned to us. During COVID, the Australian government asked us to help Australians return home. In fact, some members of Parliament, and from all sides of politics, also asked us to help their constituents return home, and we did. Let me give the committee a few examples of where we helped out when very few others were putting their hand up. After Qantas suspended all its international passenger flights at the end of March 2020, we were one of the few airlines that kept flying in and out of Australia. We immediately added an extra 48,000 weekly seats to Australia to bring stranded Australians home, to bring doctors and nurses in, and to carry in medical supplies. In fact, during that first year of the pandemic, Qatar Airways became Australia's biggest international airline. We worked closely with Australian embassies in places like Afghanistan, India, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, and Turkey to bring Australian officials and military personnel home. And we never stopped paying refunds to our customers or to their travel agents during and after COVID-19. So far, we've paid out 600 million Australian dollars in refunds to our Australian customers. We believe that if our application for additional Qatar Airways flights to Australia is approved, it would create an additional $3 billion of economic benefits to Australia over 5 years. The Victorian government estimates that a second daily flight from Doha to Melbourne alone would create more than 900 jobs. Let me paraphrase the evidence that Dr. Tony Wever gave to this committee on Tuesday last week. He said there would be a material improvement in inbound tourism, largely from Europe. That would be somewhere in the order of $1 billion Australian dollars. And there would be a material reduction in airfares by somewhere between 7% and 10%. Let me finish by saying that we believe the arguments in favour of additional flights into Australia are clear and they are strong. We believe granting Qatar Airways 28 additional flights to and from the 4 regulated gateways, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, and another 7 flights under the regional package would have a positive impact on the Australian economy. I expect you have many questions for us and we look forward to answering them. Thank you.
Thank you. Never was a truer word said. I'll kick off and then we'll go to the opposition and crossbench. Given the strong support for Australia during COVID, you said you were surprised and shocked by the government's decision to reject your additional flights. When did you actually submit your application to the Australian government for those additional flights?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Maybe, if it helps, to clarify our roles and our expertise a little. My colleague Fatih is our expert on the regulatory relationships and the aeropolitical affairs. I will more address the commercial questions this committee may.
Got it.
So, Fatih.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, our first application was made in 22nd of August 2022. And on 14 July 2023, we received the letter that is actually received on the 20th of July, but dated 2014. We came to know about the rejection actually on the 10th. So it was 3 dates in a row.
So how did you find out on the 10th then, if you didn't receive the letter from the Minister? Sorry?
Through the media.
So you found out your application for additional flights was rejected by the Australian government through the media?
Yeah, the first time. And then on the 20th of July, we received the letter dated 14 to our civil aviation, which they passed it to us.
So even the letter was 4 days after the media had been informed?
Yep.
So given you submitted the application on the 22nd of August, talk us through the process that you went through with the government in understanding your application, the benefits, the downsides. I mean, we've heard a lot of evidence thus far about the importance of having a cost-benefit approach to these types of applications. Walk us through what engagement you had with the Minister and with the Department about your application.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. This is a good question because the timeline is very simple. Our authority put their application to the authority here, which is the Department of Infrastructure. And followed with that, we submit a business case called Qatar Airways engagement with Australia, which highlight the benefits and the reasons why we should be given the frequency and the priorities within that. So we show our added value to the market. We show the incremental frequency reasons. Then we also discuss few issues in that submission about how open the MOU and the ASA to support the grant of such frequency, because it has very good provisions. That was made also in April 2022. Then after that, we submit our, as an airline, through the QCA, which is our Civil Aviation Authority, we submit our documents, which shows that. And I think we put it also on part of our submission to your authority.
So what engagement did you have from the department, the regulator?
I did myself directly engaged with the director responsible of the negotiation and international relation for a follow-up. It's a normal process that we ask because we need to prepare. We need to have a clarity and certainty in the beginning, so we need to know when the frequency will be granted. So we plan our fleets. It's a lot of dynamic process that is very important, so we need it early. We did a lot of follow-ups. Some of them are directly. I came here to Canberra. I met the department.
Did you meet the Minister?
No.
Did you meet the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office?
Not when I was in Canberra. I met the Minister in a social event.
What was the social event?
It was the PM dinner night in Sydney.
Yep.
And I went to her directly. I, of course, greeted her and I asked, I said, we ticked all the green boxes for our application, Minister, if any progress, but no indication from her side saying yes or no, but it wasn't negative at that time.
So what do you think the reason is that your application for additional flights, which the evidence to the committee thus far has been was only upside for the Australian travellers, our freight industry and competition more broadly. What do you think the real reason was for the government to reject your application?
Thank you, Senator. Honestly, I'll be clear on this, that this is a very confusing status because we don't know the reason. We haven't received the reason. Our authority didn't get. But of course, we read the media and we receive different...
9 different reasons.
Yeah. So that's how we classify it. But till now, no. And accordingly, the authority have also sent a letter on August 2023 requesting for a consultation under Article 16, which is the article that calls for a consultation in case negotiation or progress in traffic rights or other issues is not progressed. And within 60 days, we expect that we receive a positive response. We
And
did
when
receive.
when is the 60 days up?
It will be by 24 of October, if I recall properly, because the department received the application, I think, approximately on 26 of August. And the department did acknowledge to the embassy and to the CA that they received, and they will consider responding as soon as possible. That's what it says.
So we might get an answer on the 24th. Would Qatar Airways have any problems or issues with the documents that you have shared with the government about your application becoming public or being made available to this committee?
We actually have put them publicly here. So we've been asked the question by the Secretariat, and we have no issue to put those information public.
But
because
the correspondence between you and the department, between your regulator and the department, you don't have any issue with that becoming public?
I'm not sure about our regulator. I can talk about ourselves. The letters that we exchange with the department, we believe they are transparent and there is nothing hidden facts there.
All right. Thank you, Mr Ati. Deputy Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now, Mr Ati, you've got over 35 years of aviation experience. You've got a wide range of academic qualifications, network planning, commercial management, aviation law. You obviously oversee aeropolitical and corporate affairs for Qatar, and in my opinion, you're well placed to provide evidence to this committee today. And I thank you for your appearance. Now, Qatar is obviously an important trading partner to Australia. The value of our trade is in order of around $3 billion, approximately. And Australia is a large purchaser of fertiliser and aluminium and things like this from Qatar. So I understand the importance of our trade relations. Now, in your opening statement, you describe being surprised by the government's decision to block flights into Australia. Does this mean historically we've had good bilateral relations between our two countries?
Thank you, Senator, and I can see you have seen my Facebook or LinkedIn. Okay. Look, the relation between countries and in the aviation sector is a long-term graph. It's not a short memory graph. It normally takes years to build the aviation relation, and I believe that the aviation relation with Australia started way back, 2003. It started at its infancy till the date that the COVID hits. And, you know, we need to be also aware that before the COVID is something, during the COVID is something else, and after our current situation is something else. And during the COVID, I believe we have fulfilled an excellent being good corporate citizen for Australia as well, being there at all times. We have established two offices at the time. One is a 24/7 called Aeropolitical Relief AU. The other one is Get You AU Home. So we were your citizen at the time, and all our mission was to look after the national of Australia. We looked at them carefully. We carried them across the world. We carried hundreds and thousands. And after that, we applied to increase the frequency, because during the COVID, at the time of need, we asked for an increase. Sydney, we had by bilateral 1 frequency. During the COVID, we asked to be 3. We got granted 3 daily. We asked Melbourne to be 2 by day. We got granted 2. We never had flights to Brisbane. We got Brisbane. And we increased also Perth, because it was a seriously underconnected market at the time, and people need to come to Perth. So it was genuine for us. It was smooth and reasonable that we apply, and we get a response back. When we applied in August, we were told that the federal budget takes time to November, exceptionally this time. So we understood that, but moving to January, February, we assumed that everything was in order. It took longer time to make a decision, and it was shocking for us to get the decision through the media. And it was more shocking that we received the letter later, which does not describe why. So this is from where we got surprised, the word surprised.
Yeah, so I guess my next question would be in regards to unused access. So recently, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister of our country, Richard Marles, said that Qatar have unused access right now. That is the issue. This is one of the many different excuses that we've now seen from the government for denying your requested expansion of flights into and out of Australia. What does the Minister mean by unused access?
I think Australia has a very unique bilateral traffic rights which classify the traffic rights into three categories. The first category is gateways, which is Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth. And another category, which is the regional package, which you can still go through those gateways, but heading via or beyond the regional secondary market. And then the third category, which is called secondary airports, which is very minimal population cities. In the main gateways, we had 28, and they are fully utilized.
Fully utilised. Yep.
Yes. On the regional package, we have 7, and they are fully utilized.
Right.
And this is not different than any other airlines that has the 3 category. But
Yep.
the only difference is we are one of the few airlines, if not the only, that has actually used all its quota. So if we look at our neighbor competitors in the region, they didn't even use 50% of their capacity.
Your quota right now is full. You can't bring any more flights in, even if you wanted to. Okay.
Yeah. And then there is the last one, which is the secondary airports, and this is unrestricted for anybody. But these markets are very small, marginal, and you can't reach them unless you go through the gateways.
Yep. So now, speaking about the secondary airports, I understand that regional airports like Cairns and the Gold Coast have expressed some interest in striking a deal with you. So can you explain to this committee whether this is a feasible solution for your business or not to fly into these regional airports instead of the bigger airports?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think the request which we made, 28 additional, is a simple request to add additional second one to offer more connectivity. That's a very important thing. We need to cement within what we have at the gateways, because now we are seriously disadvantaged comparing to any other operators from the Gulf. We have 28 frequency. I think our neighbors has 105 because of the commercial partnership. I think we look very disadvantaged in that area. I think.
So for people playing along at home, who are your competitors that you're talking about here?
Look, the map is flat, and our competition within the map is the direction from Australia to the Gulf, Middle East, heading to Europe, Middle East and Africa and so on. So that is where the market competition. So when I mention competitors in the route, we're talking about Emirates and Etihad.
All right, so I guess my next question would be, obviously your airline was quite supportive of Australia during the pandemic, and that's great. Now, do you feel like this support has gone unacknowledged by the government? The support that your airline provided?
I wouldn't classify it acknowledged or unacknowledged, but the acknowledgement should have come through the positive response to our bilateral traffic rights to increase, which was already increased during the pandemic.
Yeah. So I believe that your airline just got approved for more flights into the United States. Is that correct?
We are enjoying a very good liberal relationship with the United States, where we have an open sky that was also sealed during the COVID. It's an old air service agreement, but the process in the US is to ratify it, and it was ratified during the COVID period, and we fly to 12 destinations in the US with over 120 frequency a week.
Is Australia being unfair to your airline? Is the Australian government being unfair?
Our application being unfairly rejected, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Sheldon.
Good. Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr Rouse and Mr Atty, for joining us this morning. I'm a bit disappointed that Mr Al Backer is not here. It's Mr Al Backer and Mr Alan Joyce, the only CEOs that haven't joined us during this inquiry. There's a number of questions that Mr Al Backer and comments that Mr Al Backer has made from various parts of the world. I just want to understand why Mr Al Backer is not here and why he's not able to come here so we can, Australian Parliament can scrutinise him.
Thank you for the question, Senator, and allow me to respond. I think, as you would well understand, the Chief Executive Officer of a global airline like ours, with multiple stakeholders all across the world, the diary of a Chief Executive Officer is filled many weeks, if not many months, in advance. Now, I'd like to commend this Secretariat for putting together such a strong committee of inquiry in such a short time frame. But to fill you in, Senator, Qatar Airways was invited to appear before this forum less than 2 weeks ago. We responded immediately saying that Mr al-Bakr would not be available, but that we would make available executives at a senior level from the organisation, from our headquarters, who would be in a position to answer the questions of the focus of this inquiry into the bilateral relationship and flights. We responded immediately. Our participation was only confirmed by the Secretariat of this committee, I think I'm correct in saying, very late last Thursday evening. So we had a challenge in making Mr al-Bakr available, but we are here for you today.
Look, I'll repeat again. I appreciate the fact that both of you are here. It's that there is some representation, and I note there's some questions regarding the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority that I wanted to be asking questions of as well, and they unfortunately aren't here. So I'm going to ask you some questions that hopefully will be of assistance. But the reason why is we're trying to get to the bottom of Qatar Airlines and how they operate. And I'm very mindful that just last year Mr al-Bakr attacked US Airlines for employing grandmothers as air stewards, then apologised, and Mr al-Bakr apologised again for this effort this week, insisting that Qatar, and I quote, Qatar Airways firmly believes in gender equality in the workplace. Is that a true indication of where the company's actually at the moment? That it believes in gender equality, it believes in people having their own personal and, in this case, and other cases, sexual preference on what their personal decisions might be in life?
Senator, thank you so much. I'll pick up this question because it's very closer to my heart also. The values of Qatar Airways is driven from the value of the country, where we value every law, every country, everywhere we fly. And wherever we fly, we follow the rule of the land, and we respect that. In our own policies inside Doha, Qatar Airways home, we have a very accommodating and very, not just accommodating, but also tolerant for how people live together. We have 140 to 150 different nationalities from different countries who are also represented in the airline, and they live all in harmony. We all live together. We're all from different places, different kind of people. That is the success story of Qatar Airways during the time. Yes, we hear some critics from time to time, which we acknowledge those critics, and we value them as well, and we address them. And this is why we have been working very close with the ILO. We have been working very close with ITF during this long journey we had with them, not to address only the labor rights at work but we address a variety of things. And some of them, the issues you mentioned. So in principle, we are young, but we're building a good legacy of respect to others and strong foundation of respecting cultures of everyone else. Thank you.
So this goes to a point you just touched on, the ILO, that Qatar Airlines in 2015 were found to breach ILO conventions regarding termination of women who were pregnant. The ILO found that Qatar Airways engaged in the practice, and so has that practice stopped, and what is the position of the airline now?
Senator, thank you so much. I really take this opportunity to also confirm to you that we've been in this long journey addressing all these issues. So we have a long relation now with ILO in relation to the whole labor rights at work, and within the scope of our own policy, there is no termination for women, We hear that in the media, but it's not. And in fact, because women who are pregnant are offered ground job, and I'm talking about women who are cabin crew, and once they get a ground job, they get a very good maternity leave, which is over 9 weeks, plus a quite short working hours after birth to ensure that she take care of the baby. Families is on the top of our priorities.
If I may add one detail. So our
ahead.
maternity leave provisions for our employees is 9 weeks on a paid basis that may continue to be extended after that, combining with unpaid or other forms of leave. And as Fatih mentioned, on return to work, reduced hours.
And just has Qatar Airways ever assisted in the deportation of employees from Qatar Airlines if there's been a different view from the employees and a falling out with the company?
Senator, can you clarify? I didn't understand your question.
Well, if there's, for example, if cabin crew are required to adhere to a curfew in Qatar, which I understand that they are, is that correct?
Senator, I think this is taken out of its context because cabin crew are not having curfew. We advise our crew to be as early as 4 o'clock in the morning, and 7 o'clock they can leave. So this is a period to ensure, even if they have any other work to do the next day, but this is coming home within the accommodation.
And what's the breach if there's a breach of the curfew? What's the response to that?
There is no response to that in a sense that the curfew is made to ensure, we employ different young women and boys across the world in different locations. And our job is to ensure their safety, their presence at home, and not their disappearance. You send your child who's 22 years, 23 years to work as a cabin crew in an airline in anywhere in the world. You want to make sure that he has gone home. Disappearance from home is not something that we wanted to see. So it's not a policy where to punish people or this is taken care of.
If somebody was to, if there's no curfew, so there's no deportation of somebody breaching a curfew, is that what you're saying to me?
No, what I'm saying is first of all, we need to identify two things. The curfew is, what you call it curfew, is coming at home up to 4 o'clock in the morning, can leave back at 7. That doesn't mean it's a curfew. It means we need to ensure there is a presence of the crew. We need to ensure that these foreign young men and women in Doha, they come back home. It's a recorded message. That's it. It's not about if you don't come home, we're going to fire you. This is not the issue. This is the safety of these people when they are in Doha. Second, deportation. The airline does not deport the crew. The airline, whenever received somebody who, like Qantas here, if somebody violates a certain immigration law or something, they get deported. We are an airline. We carry people who are sent out.
Just on
Senator Sheldon, just for this round, this will be the last question, then I'll come back to you.
The question regarding the timing of the letters. Are you aware that the Qatari Civil Aviation Authority when did they communicate with you that they'd received correspondence on?
When they got it on 20th of July, I think they communicated to us on the 21st.
Right. And you mentioned that the timing of the of media making contact, but the first media announcement, I just want to get the timelines correct. It's not a trick question. I'll leave that to my colleagues on the right. On the 18th of July, there was an article, which is the first article I understand that appeared in the Australian Financial Review. Minister, and it's under ASA de Cresta. It's the 18th of July 2023. And it goes, the Australian government terminated a request from Qatar Airways to add more Australian routes, and the article goes on. That is the first record I can find of media coverage of the issue. The 18th of July. 18th of July.
18? No. What we heard is on the 10 or 11, and then I believe after that it went viral on the news.
I've got further questions. I'll go back.
Yeah, but we can cross-check that.
Mr Arty, yes, thank you. You can take things on notice if you don't have the details to hand. Senator Birmingham, you have the call.
Thanks, Chair. And gentlemen, thank you very much for travelling from Qatar to be here and to appear before this committee at short notice. And thank you also to Qatar Airways for the support, particularly during COVID-19, your participation in the International Freight Assistance Adjustment Mechanism, as well as the repatriation of many Australians. It has been noted by many witnesses to this committee to date in terms of the value that provided. Just quickly to follow up there from Senator Sheldon, it would be appreciated, Mr Atty, if you could identify how the media contact to Qatar Airways came about around the 10th or 11th of July and whether there was actual media publication at that time. And perhaps if that you could come back to us on that. And similarly, you referenced discussions with Minister King, I think you said at a dinner with the Prime Minister in Sydney.
It's the DPM night dinner, the DPM dinner.
The DPM dinner. Again, perhaps if on notice you could provide details of what that dinner was and where it was and when it was.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Just at a high level, what is Australia missing out on as a result of the rejection by the Australian government of Qatar's application?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think you'll find this articulated in a bit more detail in our submission to this inquiry. But we calculate or we estimate the economic benefits that additional flights would bring to Australia is just a little over 3 billion Australian dollars over a 5-year cycle. Now, if you ask, how do we get to that? We're looking at the total volume of additional capacity we would be providing into the market. We look at how many of those seats we expect to fill, and we do see Australia currently as a underserved market from the markets we participate in from Europe, Middle East and Africa. We then look at the mix between Australian residents we would expect on those flights and international visitors. And then we look at international visitor spending here in market, average length of stay, typical hotel rates, that kind of thing. So those are the kind of inputs we take. That's into our own internal modelling. Our planning colleagues use this as a guiding principle for a lot of the new routes we operate. So it's not something that's foreign to us. It's part of what we do. And we've noted that you've had several other experts commenting before this inquiry about how they estimate the value to Australia of additional flights. In fact, we note that we're kind of towards the lower end of the range of almost everyone's estimates. So that gives us confidence that, we're talking real and meaningful contribution. We regard it as a modest increase in our flying in the overall context, but with a meaningful impact for the country.
Thank you, and I appreciate you putting that on the record. Whilst I'd love to unpack it a little further, I want to get through a few other questions too, and go to the detail of the engagement that occurred during the application process. Did the Australian government raise the 30 October 2020 incident at Hamad International Airport with Qatar Airways or, to your knowledge, authorities at any stage during the negotiations or consideration of the application?
Not up to our knowledge. Nothing was raised for Qatar Airways, but not to our knowledge if it's raised even with our government.
Thank you. Did the Australian government ever advise Qatar Airways to increase its flights to secondary airports instead of through gateway airports?
No, that wasn't in the table.
Did the Australian government ever advise Qatar Airways to increase the size of the aircraft that it is flying into gateway airports instead of seeking extra rights to land at those airports, and what's the feasibility of doing that if they were to provide such advice?
Yeah, I'll let my colleague answer the feasibility side, but from the regulatory side, there was no request to do that. We have the flexibility to move between a 777 or a 380, but for commercial reasons, we decide where we fly the 380, and Matt can explain that as well.
So, Senator, we currently fly the A380, which is our largest passenger aircraft. We fly that one every day to Sydney and Perth. So with our current fleet, there's no more growth possible in those markets. We did note, I can't recall who was saying, but we did note in some of the media interest in this topic, suggestions that, well, why don't you just put A380s everywhere? Now, from an airline perspective, that's not necessarily the practical, optimal or ideal way of scheduling. And what we see with the A380 is, though it's very large for passenger, it's actually not an aircraft with the ideal mix between passenger and freight. So in the belly of the aircraft is opportunity for bringing imports into Australia and the opportunity for Australian producers to export their product to global markets. A380 is not really the ideal solution for that. It has limited freight capacity. I think the final point we would make is that the A380 is a large and four-engine aircraft. It has a higher emissions per block hour than the smaller aircraft we would ideally put into those markets. So we see on balance the commercial angle from passenger perspective and from freight perspective, as well as the concerns around decarbonisation in this industry would actually be better suited to increase frequency rather than change everything to one particular aircraft type.
You've almost preempted the next of my sequence of questions here. Did the Australian government ever raise sustainability issues with Qatar Airways or authorities in relation to the application?
Senator, thank you. It's an important question because also part of our submission to the department, we show how efficient our aircrafts are and how fuel efficient they are. We also operate the state-of-the-art modern fleet that is actually very efficient. Qatar Airways is one of the pioneers in getting certifications related to environment sustainability in aviation. We're one of the few that operate to Australia who has such a certification. In short, does the department ask us about sustainability as a reason? The answer is no.
Okay. So you, in fact, proactively identify what you believe are the merits of your sustainability equation, and how do you believe those merits can stack up against your competitors?
Yes, and we did that in several submissions, but the latest was the one in 2022, in November.
Thank you. Did the Australian government ever raise workforce standards or conditions for your employees with you during the consideration of the application?
Not at all.
So to be clear, the Australian government did not raise the incident at Doha Airport, did not raise concerns around workforce conditions, did not proactively raise sustainability issues themselves, did not suggest that you should fly to more gateway airports, and did not suggest you should put on bigger planes in any part of the consideration of the application.
There was no response at all, and none of these issues was raised at any point of time.
So basically, all of the public grounds that seem to have been aired in a very ad hoc manner since the decision became public weren't actually put to Qatar during the consideration of the application.
It wasn't put to Qatar Airways any time, but what happens later for the justifications, I can't judge. How is it driven?
Thank you. Can I ask about the role of the safeguards clause in the existing agreement? And again, have any concerns been identified under that safeguards clause since it was put in place by the previous government? And did the current government, in consideration of the most recent application, propose any need to change, strengthen or otherwise that safeguards clause?
Yeah, thank you. The safeguard provision was a journey between our civil aviation and the department. They exchanged several texts We understand that the safeguard provision and the fair competition is a platform to grant further frequency while it is taking care of the interests of the national airlines. We have made some observation on that safeguards provision, including we requested intentionally to add a paragraph that looks after our interest as well, which is the abuse of dominant position by others, because we operate a very minimum number of frequency to Australia. We cannot be dumping capacity. We cannot be abusing dominant position. We cannot have a practice that change anything in the market. We have one flight a day, and we were aiming for a second flight a day. That cannot shake the market from a competition perspective or distort the market, especially if your other competitors have the right to move from 1 to 8 daily to the same city. So in order to protect ourselves, we asked for a provision to protect us from the abuse of a dominant position. It took time, it got agreed, and in April 2022, the MOU was signed, and after that, we got released the 7 frequency that we started to operate to Brisbane. So from 21, we moved to the 28.
Senator Birmingham, just one last question.
Thank you. You mentioned in response to a question from Senator McKenzie, I think it was, the process under Article 16. What is your hope or ambition or that of Qatari authorities from use of that provision? Are you looking for a review of the rejection of the application for additional flights, or is it simply a process to try to get some reasons and explanation for the rejection?
Senator, thank you. I can speak as the airline. I cannot identify what's the intention of the government by calling for the consultation under 16. But for us as an airline, yes, we want to firm that we get granted the frequency, because we had plans to deploy those aircrafts well in advance. We have to make sure that before the winter season, summer season, aircrafts are aligned. We aim to operate before Christmas. We hope that we manage to do that.
So it would still be possible if the government reviewed the decision and made a quick decision for you to have extra flights by this Christmas?
Yes, we hope so. Yes, we hope so.
That would be great news for travellers and our tourism industry.
Yeah, we hope so.
Thank you,
yes.
Senator. Thank you. And next we'll go to Senator Allman-Payne. I believe you've got a question.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. Thanks for appearing before the committee today. I'm actually just putting on the record that we do have some questions in relation to the incident that happened at Doha International Airport on the 2nd of October, but we will submit those to you in writing, and we're happy to get a written response. Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And next we'll go to Senator Sheldon.
Just a brief question, but maybe I'll take this on notice. During the period of COVID, there was obviously Qatar Airlines was carrying out a lot of freight work on behalf of initiatives from the then federal government. Are you able to quantify the amount of monies that were paid during that freight period?
We can check that, yeah.
Is it more than a couple $100 million?
I don't have the number handy, but I can revert back to you on this.
Would you be able to give us a rough estimate? Is it more than a couple $100 million or a few $100 million? Or?
Senator, I haven't had an answer on that ready, but I can get back to you.
As I understand, it was some hundreds of millions of dollars, but if you can come back with a final figure, that would be a great deal of assistance to the committee. The other question is just that, and touching on following up from a statement from previous questioners. There's been a lot of media coverage in Australia in 2020 regarding the treatment of the Australian women transiting through Doha. And could you please talk us through what happened in your perspective? And is Qatar Airways actively looking to settle the case with the women? I'm very mindful of some of the evidence we received yesterday from the Qatari Australian Business Association. And he said in those comments, and I'm paraphrasing, he said in those comments that this is a matter that should be dealt with and settled quickly. Where are we up to, and what's transpired for us to be in the situation we're in now, and is there a pathway forward to get this resolved?
Senator, this matter is currently before the Federal Court of Australia. I think you might be aware of that the women involved have commenced legal proceedings. We are participating in that process. We think it's a very important process and we need to honour it and respect it. It does preclude us from going further into this topic today, but the assurance we would like to give this committee is that the outcome of that federal court case is something that we will honour and abide. We have voluntarily submitted to the jurisdiction of the federal court in this matter, and we would like to see that progress, and we'll follow the guidance of the court.
Before I hand over to my colleague, is that including mediation as well?
I'm not familiar with the details of the process. If that's part of it, then we would certainly participate.
If you're able to take that on notice, whether mediation's also being entered into.
Thank you. I might have a few questions and then hand to Senator White. Just going back to the meeting that...
Sorry, Chair. Yep. The opposition's had the bulk of time so far. This time was set aside for...
Senator, I'm keeping an absolute tight watch on times, and Senator White will get her time.
That's my point. Yeah, so there will be enough time for the government and senators to ask questions.
Yes. Just going back to the meeting, the informal meeting you had with Minister King, where you canvassed your application. Did you speak to the Prime Minister or his advisors?
I met the Prime Minister casually, shook hands, spoke about the aviation policy that he made in 2009, and expressed that Qatar Airways is looking for further connectivity to Australia. And it was more of a courtesy talk.
And what was the reaction of the Prime Minister when you met him and shook his hand and advised him of your application?
I'm not able to read what's inside the Prime Minister's head, but he was welcoming.
It's a handy skill.
He was welcoming to me personally. He was very hospitable.
Thank you. What date was that dinner?
2nd of March.
2nd of March 2023?
Yep.
And what was the nature of the dinner?
It was the Prime Minister's annual dinner.
The Prime Minister's annual dinner?
Yep.
Was it a fundraising dinner?
I don't know, to be frank.
If you
wouldn't know. I wouldn't
address
know.
that would be helpful. And can I please request on notice copies of the documents by Qatar Civil Aviation Authority dated the 16th of August 2022 and the 14th of August 2023,
yep,
as these were not included in the submission. I would also like to request on notice copies of documents from the Department of Infrastructure and Transport dated the 14th of July 2023 and the 25th of August 2023. Senator White.
How would you describe your bilateral access arrangements with Australia?
At current, we're growing very slow, but the accessibility itself is disadvantaged to Qatar Airways comparing to the competition we have. Specifically, on the direction, as I explained to the chair, that it's about geography, and for geography, our competitors is whom they carry passengers on the nearby, which is in this case the Emirates. 168 frequency against 28, it's definitely a disadvantage to us.
But this approach is pretty consistent between successive governments, isn't it?
I wouldn't classify it that way. I would say also during 2009 to 2015, when we got only 7 frequency, UAE carriers got about 77 frequency approximately.
Sure, but the way you've been treated is...
So we look at the progress and we look at what we have done during the COVID. We get more ambitious with the Australian consumers who wants us back here.
But my point is that successive governments are treated you the same way, in such a way that your access to Australia has never increased by more than 7 flights at a time, has it?
Yes, but during the COVID has been increased to 3 times a day.
But outside COVID, it was never increased more than 7 times at a time, was it?
If I remove the COVID period, we will be removing a very important part of the aviation relation history with Australia, and that is a date is very important because in those dates, we were granted 3 daily to Sydney, 2 to Melbourne, we got additional Brisbane, we got additional to Perth, and that was out of the bilateral. So the flexibility of getting that gives you the appetite that if I'm such a good airline to the Australian consumer, why can't I get the same growth or less, which we have actually asked for, to continue a regular operation, to offer these connectivities and continue serving our consumer.
So your view was that it was in Australia's national interest to reward Qatar with more flights than we'd ever negotiated with you before, because of what happened during COVID. Is that your evidence?
That is not the views I expressed, Senator, here. What I have expressed is the work we've done during the COVID and the appreciation we got from your different departments, DFAT, Department of Infrastructure, Australian consulates everywhere, during the explosion of Beirut, during Kabul, evacuation of defense officers from Kabul. This was all very important for us to say we are great partners and we want to partner with you, with your country, with your people continuously. And what we have asked is a very modest number of frequency.
Well, it's not modest compared to what you previously had. You had 7 flights at a time, and then your last ask was 28 flights in one go, which is completely out of what the history has been over a period of time, isn't it?
Senator, the growth of the market is determined by the growth of the relation as well, and we believe our relation grown very big.
Sure, but we've also heard evidence that Australia's international flight traffic has not returned to pre-COVID levels.
My colleague Matt can give you those numbers.
So in 2018, an application from Qatar for additional rights was put on hold for 4 years. Why do you think that was?
As I explained earlier, there was a time for talk on the safeguards and fair competition, and the Australian Department of Infrastructure has views, we had views, and the negotiation kept on till April 2022, where we got the signed agreement, and on we go. And the signed agreement should be a platform to grant those frequencies.
So in their submission to the inquiry, the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority revealed that on the 5th of April 2018 they received a letter from Michael McCormack's department proposing to allow an additional 7 services between Australia and Qatar. 1 week later, on the 12th of April, Mr McCormack's department sent a further letter rescinding the previous offer and naming new conditions that had to be agreed. That was pretty unusual, wasn't it, from your point of view?
Yeah, and we asked the question, and the question came back that the Australian government would like to modify on the air service agreement provisions related to safeguards and fair competition, and there we started to work with that.
So 4 years it took, though?
Yes, that's very true.
Can I ask you, how many employees directly employed do you have directly employed in Australia?
Sorry, Senator.
How many employees are directly employed by Qatar?
Senator, I understand the number is currently 85.
85. And what sort of jobs are they performing?
So we have sales teams, we have marketing colleagues, we have business analysts, we have staff supervising our airport operations, and we do also indirectly employ service providers for many of the services.
Sure, I'm talking about directly employed people. And so neither of you are based here, are you? You're based in Doha.
Correct, I'm based in Doha.
Yeah. So I guess if I go back to what Mr McCormack said, he said who was responsible for denying the request by Qatar to expand its services in Australia. He was quoted recently as saying, "You can't have an airline coming in from overseas and just undercutting to the point where Australian jobs are at risk and Australian airlines are placed at a disadvantage. We can't have an airline with deep pockets undercut, and then people go to them, as opposed to an airline that may be majority Australian owned and unable to compete with this unfair undercutting of prices. What do you think of that commentary from him?
Senator, thank you for these remarks. I didn't hear them, to be frank. I didn't follow those remarks. But if it was said at the time, it's a government official. He says what he sees appropriate at the time.
Well, perhaps you want to consider... Sorry, I missed what you said. What do you think about it?
Well, Senator, I don't think either of us had heard those comments previously. But I think your question was getting into, or your quoting of those comments was about Qatar and its price positioning and competitive angle in this market. So perhaps I could offer some insights
Well,
there.
I'm just telling you what the former Transport Minister who denied you extra capacity in 2018 said about his decision. And I'm interested because, you know, you're very vocal about this recent decision, and I just want to understand what do you think about what he now says as to why you were denied it in 2018.
Senator, I think I tried to elaborate that our relation with Australia grown over the time, and there was a turning curve, and that's a very important time when we were the only or one of the few operating to Australia on these dark nights of COVID. That gives us the liberty to say we need to grow, and we express that, and that's a very modest growth, what we have asked. And in return, we offer the best services for consumers, and our state-of-the-art aircraft can offer a lot of comfort for long-haul travel, and we are still not even 50% from what we classify as our competitors in the route by getting that, in any case.
So really, your motivation for all of this is about your competitive advantage, isn't it? Whereas, as you would expect, the Australian government's view is about our national interest, not your competitive advantage. And that's fair, isn't it? That's the way it works in all bilaterals.
Senator, respectfully, we understand the sovereignty of the Australian government in determining its national interest, but we do think in this particular decision there are a number of key interests that maybe weren't taken into account as fully as we think they should be. We don't think this decision fully takes into account the interests of Australians heading abroad who are today paying too much for their airfares. It's no secret. We don't think it's in the interest of international visitors coming here for the same reason. We don't think it's in the interest of Australian exporters who are crying out for additional freight capacity to ship their commodities like chilled meats to the high-growth Middle East, North Africa markets. We certainly don't think it's in the interests of the literally hundreds of thousands of small businesses operating in the Australian tourism economy and employing hundreds of thousands of people in tourism jobs. Now, we respect the sovereignty of the Australian government in determining its national interest, but we think some key interests may have been missed in the calculation.
But, and you also, your prime focus, though, is your commercial interest, isn't it?
Yes, we are a commercial entity.
And so you also believe that your commercial interest has been significantly disadvantaged, you think, by this decision. That's the prime motivation, isn't it?
Senator, correct. We would like to have the opportunity to bring our offering in greater numbers to the Australian public.
Can I just ask you, just in relation to your workforce, you had a few questions from Senator Sheldon about your workforce. Are any of those workers throughout the world unionised?
Senator, yes.
Well, whereabouts are they unionised?
As my colleague Fatih previously explained, we observe the laws everywhere we operate. We operate a large global network. In some countries, the system of unions that we have here in Australia is not the same or is not existing. In other countries, there are unionised workforce. We don't ask our employees whether or not they are members of a union. We're aware that here in Australia we do have members of the union among our workforce today. To us, we're agnostic as to that. We work within the framework of labour relations everywhere we operate.
And can I also ask you, at a press conference at Sydney Airport, your CEO once stated that, of course, the airline, has to be led by a man because it's a very challenging position. Do you believe that men are more suited to leadership roles than women?
Senator, I would like to pick up this because I was present for that conference, and while our CEO was responding on his statement, he was actually got interrupted by the ex-CEO of Qantas, Alan Joyce, who was sitting near to him, and the journalist picked up the half of the statement. So on the same night, there was an apology from the CEO of Qatar Airways, and there was clarification that this was taken out of its context.
So how many of your board members are female?
The board doesn't manage the airline. The board is representing.
No, but I understand that. But can you tell me how many of the board members are female?
We have several executives at a senior vice president level.
So how many?
From different nationalities. In a percentage, I can say there's SVP, senior vice president for cargo worldwide, is a woman. Senior vice president for corporate communication is a woman. Senior vice president responsible for talent acquisition is a woman. Senior Vice President of Nationalization and HR is a woman. Our chief previously HR was a woman. We have several of them in a very leading positions. And not only that, but our percentage of female growing at work is at a leader or a management position as per the IATA project, which we participate to reach 25 by 25, which means 25% of the management and the workforce to reach by year 2025. We have exceeded that target. We are in 26 already in the year 2023. Our total workforce is 38,000 female that are working closely with their colleagues from everywhere in the world.
Thank you.
Could you
Senator White, this will be the last one.
Yeah, thank you. On notice then, can you give us actually the actual statistics? I understand the complete statistics of the gender breakdown of your senior executives and also of the board members. Thank you.
I was going to just a brief, Chair.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just a brief question. So, just to back on the matters we asked before, just with does Qatar guarantee that we won't have this problem again that we had with women going through, and of course there was Australian women amongst other women from other parts of the world through Doha in 2020?
Senator, you're referring to the incident at the airport?
Definitely the incident in Doha airport in 2020.
Yeah. Senator, let me speak generally.
I might just sort of put this in context because there is a concern by the Australian women that they fear that it will happen again.
Yeah. Senator, let me provide assurance. This was very much a one-off incident, a very extreme incident. We've had nothing like it previously in our history. Please say that. And we're completely committed to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. Every year we board, every day we board on our flights more than 110,000 people, men, women and children. In the first 6 months of this year, more than 20 million people passed through Hamad International Airport. And across the last 12 months, we've boarded more than 1.5 million Australian customers have taken flights with Qatar Airways. Our customer split is roughly 50-50 between male and female passengers. So we see this as a one-off and an isolated incident. We're committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again. And we have a very long-standing track record of being a leading player in safety initiatives for our customers, for our staff, for our crew on board.
Thank you.
In fact, we launched the industry standard IATA operational safety audit, the benchmark certification for this area.
Mr. Russell, you can understand that these women are very fearful of this happening again. You can understand that the traumatic nature of what occurred during this matter, and it still hasn't been settled. I'm just deeply concerned about, for those women, about the trauma they've had perpetrated against them.
We do understand the interest in this topic, and I can understand why you're asking me this question.
Thank you.
We think the best response is with some numbers, while we respect the process through the Federal Court of Australia.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Smith, all the way from WA, you have the call.
Thank you very much.
Key gateway city who didn't know that they were on the application.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. I'll move to my second question now. Thank you. Thank you very much for representatives from Qatar making themselves available to the committee. In your opening statement and in response to questions from Senator Birmingham, am I correct to assume that in making your application to government last year, that you had every expectation that you would receive a positive response?
Senator, thank you so much. Yes, I agree with that analysis.
At what point did you start to doubt that your application would be received positively?
We never had a doubt that our application will be negatively till we heard through the media, and later the letter came to our civil aviation who informed us that our application has been rejected. That's in July.
So in none of your assessment of competitive risk, competitive response, did you expect anything other than a positive response?
Yes, because the process is we wait for consultations to take place, and that's the indication we had, that there will be a meeting and it's waiting for approvals. And that's the meeting between the State of Qatar and the Commonwealth of Australia. So we were just on that waiting zone.
When, in making the application in August last year, in what month were you expecting a decision?
We followed immediately a month after the August 2022, but we were told that the federal government budget this year exceptionally is going to be in November. So the case of the bilateral for Qatar will take up to January, which was fine for us to wait till January, and then we move on from there. Because
and
we needed, sorry, Senator, because the reason for the date is because we needed to operate those flights on 1st of April 2023. And to deploy those aircrafts, we have to have a certainty much earlier. It's for destinations. It's a massive operation. It's not small for us to redeploy aircraft, so we needed the certainty early. That's why we were following between January and February to make sure by March our summer schedule included those flights.
And what was the date that you decided that the 1st of April 2023 flight commencement arrangements would not be possible?
Actually, when till the first week of March, when we didn't get a response, I did pay a visit to the Department of Infrastructure, and there was no indication that the meeting will happen in March. So I made sure that I call our planning and tell them to release those aircrafts which are planned for April of the year.
When you say you had a meeting with the Department of Infrastructure, was that a telephone conversation? Was that a video conference? Was that a formal meeting? Did you travel to Canberra to have that meeting?
No, I flew specially to Canberra to follow up.
And the date of that meeting was?
Approximately 6th of March, 5th of March, I'm not that, maybe 6th of March.
And how senior were the officials that you met with?
The designated person responsible for international negotiation, who is our point of contact always.
And excuse my ignorance, sir, but is that a senior person in the Department of Infrastructure?
Yes, at the level of the secretary, deputy secretary.
And in that conversation, what did officials share with you?
The application is still under process, so March is not doable.
So they said that the application was still being processed and March wasn't doable. What did they mean by the application still being processed, that the department was still considering it?
I'm not sure about the internal process, but as far as I know, it was waiting for the mandate for consultation between the two states.
In an FOI that has been made available to the committee, it's been revealed that on the 4th of January 2023, the Minister may have received a brief on the matter. Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't.
That wasn't shared with you by officials?
No, not at any time, no. Not with us. No, I wouldn't expect that to be shared anyway.
Does Qatar use any out-of-house specialist government affairs advisors?
Yes, we recruited one to follow up on our application because we can't afford traveling to Canberra every time to follow up our application, so we needed somebody resident around in Australia.
And deciding who to choose for that role, what considerations did you take into account?
Just the previous experience that they have. There is different CVs, and we pick up from the net, and we get to check on them, and we put them transparently on the register.
And you went to a number of different firms to inquire about who was best able to provide you with some out-of-house government affairs advice?
Not within Australia, but internally in our offices, yes, we do that checks.
Not in Australia, but internally in your office. What does that mean?
It means when we do the assessment, we didn't cross-check with anybody in Australia saying, is this the right firm or the wrong firm?
And so how did you come at making a decision on someone who should represent Qatar?
Yeah, we do the internal assessment based on the CVs and bios we receive about the firm that should be representing us. It's a natural process that we do everywhere.
Did you advertise? Did you sort of seek people to make an application to be Qatar's out-of-house specialist advisor? It's a good brand to have on your list, I would have thought.
No, we didn't think of it. We just needed somebody with a simple formula that can follow up the applications, just cover our absence from the land here, and ensure that he give us the right information when the application is processed, because I myself can't do those follow-ups.
At what date was the lobbyist appointed?
I can get back to you on that with the exact dates, yeah, when he was appointed.
And in providing advice to you about why the application hadn't been, why Qatar hadn't yet received an answer, what advice was provided to Qatar?
I think the only advice is there is a process of getting the mandate to set up consultations, and it was not only the state of Qatar, but it was a group of states that Australia was seeking consultation with. Wow. And the whole package will be signed together. And in this case, we have to wait for the whole mandates to be signed together.
Senator Smith,
sorry, so
we've just got a couple more senators who are seeking the call. If you, just letting you know that.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
So if you could just explain to me, in a bilateral negotiation, what is the whole that needs to be considered?
You mean the number of frequencies we're asking for?
No, just in your previous evidence, you made some remarks that didn't quite follow for me.
Yeah, we put a very compelling case showing the advantages of the operation of Qatar Airways to Australia.
Yes.
We talked about the history of the two countries. We talked about the history of our operation.
Yes.
We spoke about why we are the ideal airline to continue serving Australian. And
yes, and you made the application expecting a response in a certain time frame,
yes,
and that time frame wasn't realised. And I'm assuming that the time frame that you expected the decision to be made was a realistic time frame, and that would certainly be my observation. Then the time frame started to slip, my words, not yours, but the time frame started. You then decided to get an out-of-house specialist government affairs advisor
to follow up.
To follow up. How did they follow up for you?
It's the last question, Senator Smith.
Yeah, we didn't specify a mandate for him. These experts, they know where to follow up, exactly the department, the minister's office. You know, they have all this sort of different range of things to follow up through.
Thank you. We now have one last question from myself, from Senator White, from Senator Birmingham and Senator Babet. So that we're going to be short and sharp, please, with our questions and our answers. As Senator Smith said, the brief was given to sign off on this decision was up in the Minister's office from the 4th of January. You were being told that it was under a process. Did the lobbyists that you engage have strong relationships and connections within the Prime Minister's office and the Minister's office?
Honestly, Senator, I cannot identify how strong or weak his relationship, but we believe he is sound.
Yep.
That was our assessment, and based on that, we recruited him.
Okay. Senator White?
I just want to clarify, what you've described was, better relations and increased capacity that you had during COVID. You did, in fact, get an increase in flights by 7 in January 2022. If relations had grown over COVID so much, why didn't you get more flights, and why didn't you react to the small number that you did get from the former government after your COVID interventions and a 4-year wait?
Senator, I will try to understand. You mean why we did not object or we did not follow up when the 7 frequency were not granted?
No, you got 7. You got 7 in January 2022, right? So you've had an increase by 7, but you've described to us what a great relationship you had, how you'd flown to Australia, you'd increased your flights, and yet, after 4 years, the former government, with that background that you've described, only increased your number of flights by 7. Were you disappointed? And what? And if you were, why didn't you say anything about it?
There was a reason of justifying the negotiation path, which we had to go through, which is inserting the fair competition clause. It was partly, we also wanted to ensure that we are protected with such a fair competition clause by adding our own terminology, which if you ask for the MOU or the Air Service of Australia, Qatar, you will see that.
Thank you. Senator Babet.
Thank you, Chair. Now, we've heard evidence that the contribution, the potential contribution from Qatar having more flights into Australia is in the order of billions of dollars, many, many thousands of jobs. Now, do you think it's fair? Do you think that the process is a fair and proper process when a competitor like Qantas is afforded the opportunity to make a submission to the Minister on your application, and then that submission is kept secret by the government, to either of you?
Senator, I think that's more a question you should direct to the Australian government or to Qantas. But let me say this. When we look at this decision,
that was cheeky.
We're not challenging the reasons for the decision, but we challenge the outcome. Because the effect of the outcome is to restrain us when our key competitor on this route is not restrained. The benefit of that flows to one of Australia's airlines, but not to both. And we feel that our partner, Virgin Australia, is also restrained by this decision. So we're challenging the outcome.
Do you think Qantas has had unfair access to the government in relation to your application?
We can't speak to that.
Thank you. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. And I just want to clarify in terms of the technical consideration of the process. In the 11 months that the application stood from it being submitted in August last year to rejection in July this year, were formal consultations or negotiations ever entered into?
No, not at all.
No. So it sat there for 11 months from submission by Qatari authorities last year, for 11 months, and then you got a no without it ever actually progressing to that negotiation or consultation stage.
Not at all, except the clarification that the federal budget was in November this year exceptionally, and
which
it will only
sounds more like a stalling tactic from this side of the table, but I wouldn't expect you to comment.
Time takes to paint a plane, I would suggest. All right, there being no further questions, the committee will now suspend. We will return at the designated time so we don't get behind at 10:30. Thank you.